Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of the show. Star date is irrelevant. Time and date is irrelevant. All is relevant is that you are here listening, watching, praying to whatever deity that you ever believe in, or none at all. All we know is that you will live long and prosper. We're joined here tonight with our guest mathematician, the Simitank himself, Vel Jar from Alfred and Jarvis, or Jalvis and Alfred, or it's just both or neither, or whichever. He's smart as hell. He's a computer and a butler and a damn good tank all rolled into one. Thank you very much for joining us here. We have the usuals, the Chief Logistics Officer, Captain TimberWolf. Please give us a howl, sir.
Oh!
And enjoy that beach weather you're having over there, man. Enjoy it, enjoy it. Our Chief Intelligence Officer, Captain SarcasmDetector.
Greetings.
Our Chief Science Officer is on vacation right now. He's probably getting beaten up by some Brit. Who knows? Whatever. Our Chief of Cheesy Tactics Officer, Captain S.O.B.
Hello.
Too much cheese, man. Way too much cheese in PvP. And I'm your Chief Strategic Officer, the guy who just can't PvP worth a damn against all these pilot ships. Old Knight. We're going to jump straight into the show here. First off, we have a success story from our first build segment, and we're going to continue that on. So I just want to give a shout out over there to Senor Ernest Ramos. We enjoy your build. We enjoy you constantly smashing past 50k DPS with your side torque build. Enjoy it. We love it. Continue it on. The kinetic community is growing. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know what? We need to actually continue on with the build series. I know we've been saying we're going to do this and everything else keeps coming up, real life, whatnot. We're going to take some more time out to continue on with these build series. We're going to tie in S.A. Ross over at the pilot show for some of these things here. We're going to bring in Mr. Tank himself, who's working on his own secret project that he's going to unveil probably within this week. And we have our experts here who are going to work on Nandy builds as well as the new ships that are coming in. Speaking of this, these new cruisers, yeah, what's the deal with these things here? I know Cryptic is starting to sell new ships, but is this thing going to be a game breaker?
The ship itself, it's pretty good, but the trait is the real kicker. Every time you activate emergency-powered weapons for the full duration of the buff, you will receive a weapon power cost reduction, and your weapons will fire faster. We don't have the exact numbers, but that's a pretty significant buff.
Especially considering anyone that runs two emergency-powered weapons and the Dolphs to reduce the cooldown, that's near constant upgrade. If it's buffed right, that could be a significant increase.
Even if you're running a Drake build, that's 100% uptime, I believe. So if you're running emergency-powered weapons and emergency-powered shields, you're alternating them every 15 seconds, and the buff lasts for 30 seconds. So that is 100% uptime. But then again, we still have to know exactly what the buffs are.
It doesn't matter, man. That's disgusting. 100% uptime on that with a beam haste.
I want to point out a quick thing. If anyone's wondering how much of a drain reduction or haste reduction will actually be, let's say for sake of example it's 25%. That doesn't mean you multiply it by 3/4. It means you multiply it, the multiplier is 1 over 1 plus 0.25, because that's the way cryptic standard math works for reductions. So if it's say 25%, you'll end up being an 80% multiplier. So just pay attention to that when you go to look at it and see how good the numbers are.
Yeah, just to add to what Val just said, I'm sorry about that, there is diminishing returns when you're talking about weapon cost reduction, because there's a console that actually reduces weapon drain as well, and when you use it with, say, the cruiser command or a weapon efficiency, there is diminishing returns on it. So it's definitely not going to be as powerful as advertised.
I don't know, man. It looks, I mean, you put that with Leech and Supremacy, and then you already have 100% uptime in emergency powered weapons, and then you have the Iconian Tier 4 trait, and then the Iconian 4-piece set, that combination right there seems to be devastating. And I'm purposely leaving out one other piece of the puzzle here, because all by itself, without that other piece we're going to discuss later on in the show, that seems to me that it's just going to be seriously powerful with that combination. And you're going to have that as your new meta for all your energy builds going forward. Now, coming back to what we're going to discuss here with the ship and with this trait again, looking forward on this, do you think Cryptic is going to start designing future content around this being the new meta?
There's been interesting amounts of inconsistencies in design. I really don't know what to expect. The last couple, they released the original set of Elite content. It was very varied. They released Corfez, for example, completely new, not really challenging of a queue. They come out, they release Herald's Fear, Great Weighted Grethor, actually challenging content. It'll be interesting to see what we get, but based on the vastly varied difficulty level of the Elite queues, as it is, there's really no way to tell.
I don't know if they're going to be, like Val said, it is all over the place, especially with the difficulties of the queue. We have talked about this extensively before. Whether this is a new meta that they're going forward with, I don't believe so. I think they're just trying to look for new ideas that will sell well. And there's always the worry if this is too good that it might get nerfed in the future, and that is really, really bothersome, because if this is really good and a lot of people spend money and buy these ships specifically for this trait, and then a month or 2 months down the line they're like, well, whoops, this is not what we intended, we're going to nerf it, it's going to cause a riot. But then again, let's not get too excited. We still do not know what the stats are, what the scale of the buffs. I mean, it could be something like just a 5% haste and a 5% weapon energy reduction, which is pretty negligible in the long run. In really, really long runs, say if you're doing a 10-minute ISA, you'll notice the difference. But if you're doing a 1-minute ISA, screw it, you're better off with something else.
A quick other concern is on the nerf note. It reminds me of the subspace sheath, wasn't it, that originally said all damage and then said just energy damage. There hasn't been a whole lot of nerfs recently, but if they start hitting starship traits that people paid $30 basically for, that's going to be a really bad sign. I'd rather them be released underpowered and not touched than released overpowered and nerfed.
Yeah, but with the whole change to subwarp sheaths, aside from that, which other starship trait has been nerfed?
Did that trait actually ever work with torpedoes?
That's the thing that we're not sure. It was sold as stating as all weapons. That was what was on the description as well as on the tooltip. It was supposed to be all weapon damage. But, you know, it was later on stated that it only works with energy weapons when the bug reports were filed, and then they changed the tooltip to reflect what it actually matched. That's a whole nother topic for discussion later on, but that was it. So technically, it wasn't a nerf, it was just sold with an incorrect description on it.
Right. The only things I can think of that have really been significantly altered would be the embassy consoles, the neutronic torpedo, which I think was mostly in the guise of a bug fix, and the wording on that trait. Am I missing anything here?
There were some of the reputation traits got hit with the nerf bat a few times. If I remember correctly, our favorite trait from when Delta Rising was released, Val. The
Enhanced armor pen, something I never used back then.
Oh, not that one. The one that gave you a hull healing whenever you hit.
That was on Triple, though. I mean, I'll be honest, that needed it. It was hilarious, but it was It needed a massive nerf bat. Didn't need the
Okay.
second one.
It did need the second one or the third one. It got nerfed, and then it got nerfed, and then it got nerfed again. So it's kind of
But those were
useless.
rep traits, not actually starship traits, though.
Yeah, I don't believe any of these starship traits have been touched. It's just the several of the rep traits have been modified here and there.
And in your opinion, barring this one, which starship trait, in your mind, gentlemen, would you believe to be the most obscenely overpowered one of them all?
Lions on deck.
I disagree. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think there is any one specific starship trait that's more overpowered than the other ones.
I would say there's a very obvious tier list. Right now, there's 3 very powerful traits and a bunch of pretty good ones, and
And a bunch of useless ones, yeah.
basically.
So, all hands on deck is one of those traits. If they had gone with some of our suggestions earlier on, which is make it 15% every 15 seconds, that would have been better. Just for the fact that it's every 5 seconds, it's 5%, which requires an obscene amount of micromanaging. Most people just don't even bother with that much amount. So theoretically, if you manage to trigger a tactical power every 5 seconds to get the 5% Captain ability reduction or the 10% science abilities reduction, then yes, it is extremely powerful. But none of us really realistically are able to hit a tactical ability every 5 seconds and micromanage that in the middle of, say, an ISA or any other queue or battle like that. Realistically, we're hitting things every 15 seconds. Maybe with the activation timers, we can get every 15 seconds and then another one at 5 seconds later. So that really mitigates that. Some of the other ones like Supremacy. Supremacy is really decent. It only works with Fall and Scatter Volley, and realistically, it's like having a plasmonic leech with one embassy console, one embassy flow cap console. So, most of these days we have 3, 4 embassy consoles running, which give us up to 28 power in each subsystem. So it's not quite as powerful as that combination, but it is an alternative to something that's extremely expensive. So if you think about the cost of the plasmonic leech, and then the cost of the embassy consoles, and then the cost of upgrading the embassy consoles, and you just look at the cost of the Supremacy, which is the Astica, which I believe is a Lobby ship, which is fairly cheap on the exchange. You can get an Astica for probably half the price of a plasmonic leech. It kind of works out. What other starship traits would you say are overpowered?
The only other one I'd say that's out there that's a clear top tier one is Reciprocity. Especially because I'm a tank, and I really, really, really want that on my Romulan. Or KDF. I'd take either, but preferably both.
Well, can we be fair to say that this isn't really overpowered? It's just locked onto one faction, and the other factions don't have access to it.
I don't know that I'd call any of them directly overpowered. I'd just say there's an obvious top 3 at the moment. And it's different from a lot of areas in the game where there's top choices and then there's close to top choices. I'd say starship traits feel a lot like DOFs, where there's good expensive ones and then there's other ones.
Yeah, there'll be some that are specifically tailored to one type of build or another. I'm looking down the road between this and the next topic, where are we going to start losing the viability of other builds because of some items and some features that are introduced into the game? Is it so much to the point where this is the build that most people are using. They're blowing past content. We're going to start making things more difficult, specifically to this type of build or this range of builds, and then all the other builds will start falling by the wayside, which will make some of these other traits less useful to other people because they can't compete with these type of builds to be able to defeat this new content.
No, I think there's definitely a variety of builds out there. Um, there are different types, there are different ideas, different playstyles that can be used. It's the fact is that certain types of build become popular, become flavor of the month, and they get used by everyone because they are perceived to be the most efficient, and they probably are the most efficient or most effective. But there are other effective builds out there. There are different strategies and tactics that can be used that are just not as well known or as commonplace because people, like I said, are focused on what is most effective. And that in return kind of affects the price on the exchange, where certain things go, the price of certain things go, sky high, like the chemosite, which is ridiculously overpriced. Really, what you get from a chemosite laced weaponry 1, you're getting like 1, maybe 2K out of it in a high powered run. Is that worth 80 million, 90 million, 100 million EC? Hell no.
You see, funny because when chemosite first came out, 1, 2, and 3 were running for around 150 to 200K. And people were like, what's this thing? It doesn't look that great. Oh, torpedoes, who uses that? 2 weeks later, you'd be surprised if you could get anything under 35 million.
I would say a great analogy here is anti-proton. Everyone knows anti-proton is generally ideal for DPS, but most people don't actually realize that it's literally a 2 or 3% increase in weapon DPS, maybe over other weapon types.
Correct, and that increase you're talking about, the 2-3% increase, you only see that if you're actually doing over 50k DPS in the first place. Apart from that, if you're like doing 30k, if you're doing 20k, if you're doing 10k, you're not going to see any difference between an anti-proton and a phaser, or even a polaron. They're just the difference, what's that standard deviation between them is so small that it's insignificant.
And to get at the bigger question, what I would say is, again, standard deviation, people running the challenging elite queues like Greta or Hive, whatever, and beating them are already way far off to the right of the bell curve. And as Marshall and I are prime examples of, you can fly non-standard builds and more than pull your weight in those queues, simply because, Marshall and I are likewise at the respective ends of our bell curve. Marshall's a torpedo user, I'm a tank flyer, and both of us are more than capable of pulling your weight in those elite queues. And so, although there's a decent population in the upper DPS channels, if you compare it to the overall game population, it's an insignificantly tiny portion of people, breaking probably even 50k, and so I'm not worried about them pushing the bar up too much farther, because the bar for those queues is already at a point where so few people can make it in, but it's still at a point where it's accessible to people running very non-standard builds.
I would actually have to disagree with you on Gateway to Grethor and Herald Space Elite. And it's not because of the abilities that those mobs can use on the player. For those of us who know how to do it, we can have abilities and build a ship to counter it, whether it's science or engineering abilities, and TAC team is pretty much the de facto for our builds anyway. The problem comes with these things having so much shields and them doing so much damage to you whenever you're in very close proximity to them, that the only thing that you have left to do is use energy weapons, get at medium range, and then have these consoles that blow the hell out of the hull while the shields are still up. Which segues us to our next part of our segment tonight. These embassy consoles that do plasma explosion damage. Now, initially, when they were removed from the game temporarily, people were crying nerf. People were crying that these things were some people, I should say, were crying nerf. Some people were saying that they were underpowered. Others were saying they're overpowered. There were different things going on with the dynamics, and then they've returned, and then the same arguments happened, but it looked like the camps swapped. Some people were saying they were underpowered, some people were saying they were overpowered. But can we get a brief history of this cam, as far as what these consoles are, how they've evolved, what do we have today, and then we'll let SOB take over from there as far as what we're seeing in both PvE and PvP content.
All right, fine. So we have these embassy consoles. They come in all varieties and flavors, and they usually boost science skills. So party gen, grav gens, flow caps. Some of them have procs on them, and the procs are different. So you have shield heal, Hulk healed, plasma explosions, and I believe there might be another one. I'm not quite sure. But let's take a look at this before Delta Rising. Before Delta Rising, you can go to the embassy and you can buy either a Mark 10, Mark 11, or Mark 12 ultra rare. There was no upgrade system at that point, so it really depended on how advanced your embassy was. But let's say you got a tier 3 embassy, you can buy the Mark 12s, you can buy these consoles, and they weren't really that popular outside of a niche group that like to do certain builds with them. I being one of those people, I like to do flow cap builds. Fel will attest to this. I have so many of my builds which have 3-4 embassy consoles with flow caps and the plasma proc on there. So what did they do? The plasma proc one, how it used to work was that the console itself had a bonus to plasma damage plus a proc which added the plasma dot. Now, if you're using plasma weapons, only the plasma damage bonus applied, you didn't get the proc. But if you're using non-plasma weapons, the plasma dot applied. You don't get the bonus to plasma damage, but you got the dot itself. Now, even back then, the way they worked was anything that boosted the base damage of your weapons also boosted the base damage of the proc. So that includes stuff that boosts base damage and any of the Cat 2, Cat 3, Cat 4 damage boost on top of that. The other thing that was going on, even back then, even before Delta Rising, was if one of them procced, so you say you have 4 consoles on there, you're shooting your weapons, so you have 4 chances, 4 times 2.5% to proc this. If one of those 2.5% rolls procced, they all procced. So if you have 4 consoles, suddenly you're applying 4 dots, 4 plasma dots to a target, which lasts for 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I'm not quite sure what it is anymore. Another thing that was going on, additionally, on top of the previous stuff, was if one of those dots critted, they all critted, and they critted for the rest of the time the dot was active. So you say you have 4 dots going, the first dot gets a crit, then all 4 dots will crit for every single tick they do for the duration of 15 seconds. All right, so that was before Delta Rising. Delta Rising came along, we get the upgrade system. And here is where it gets really, really interesting. You have 2 types of scaling when you upgrade something. You have the scaling that the weapons do, and you have the scalings that consoles do. So if you take a weapon and you take it from Mark 12 to Mark 13, it goes up 3 mark levels. If you take it from Mark 13 to Mark 14, I believe it goes up something like 7 or 8 mark levels. So literally going from a Mark 12 weapon to a Mark 14 weapon, you're going about like 9 mark levels, 10 mark levels. Actually, it might be more. It might be something like 12. I'm not sure of the exact number. But the thing is, with weapons, the quality does nothing. It only gives you a very, very small. So going from a Mark 12 weapon to a Mark 12 rare weapon to a Mark 12 very rare weapon, you don't really get a base damage increase. With consoles, it is completely different. With consoles, the rarity equals a mark level. So if you're taking a console, say Mark 12 to Mark 13, that's a mark level. Mark 13 to Mark 14, that's a mark level. From rare to very rare, that's a mark level. From very rare to epic, that's another mark level. So let's take a look at the plasma consoles. They have two parts to them. They have a boost to plasma weapons, and then they have a proc. So the plasma consoles actually followed both scaling systems, but they were consoles. So let's say you have a Mark 12 console, you want to take it to epic, that is Mark 12 to Mark 13, Mark 13 to Mark 14, and then ultra rare to epic. And that's 3 times, three upgrades. So the bonus to damage, or the bonus to plasma damage, only went up 3 marks. The bonus on the dot itself followed the weapon upgrade. So you go from Mark 12 to Mark 13, 3 mark upgrades. Mark 13 to Mark 14, 6 or 7 mark upgrades. Then the ultra rare to epic, guess what? Another 6 or 7 mark upgrades. So that's what happened with these consoles. So that's why the bonus was extremely huge, going all the way up to Mark 14 epic.
I want to put a quick interjection here.
Sure.
From triple to live, the plasma damage on the console doubled from the state before any of this upgrade hit live to the state that it made it to live on, which I just found interesting when I was looking back over some screenshots that Jenna took of upgraded stuff.
They were still fiddling with the amount of bonuses that weapons get when they go up from each mark level. And they even, I think even like a month after Delta Rising was released, they went and increased it. Because I remember correctly, when Delta Rising was released, Mark 12 to Mark 13 was just like 2. And Mark 13 to Mark 14 was just 4 mark levels. They went and increased it again. So them fiddling around with the stuff, all right. So let's go back. Real review, I talked for quite a bit. So let me just point out the main 3 problems that plasma consoles had. One of them, they were boosted by base damage. Anything that boosted the base damage of weapons, including beam consoles, boosted the dot. When one procced, they all procced. And when one crit, they all crit. So they went after these consoles and they nerfed them. They nerfed them so bad they became utterly worthless. They tackled all 3 problems and then some. Like, it was really, really bad. You went from doing, 1K per second damage for however long to doing 200 damage. So it was really, really ridiculous. We complained about it. There was a thread started about it. We talked. Vel was there. Virus Dancer was there. We were all, trying to convince the devs that, this nerf was really over the board, especially considering how expensive these consoles were. Most of us bought them at Mark 12, and then we put a lot of resources into upgrading them to Mark 14 Epic. So they went back and they changed them and they rebuffed them. So they still fixed the things that were the problem before, so they're no longer buffed by anything that buffs the base damage of the weapons. If one procs, they don't all proc. They all proc independently now. And if one crits, it's the only one that crits, not all of them crit like before. The amount of damage they do now is nowhere near the amount of damage they do pre-nerf. They still do a lot of damage, but it's nowhere near what they did before. It's getting close, though. It's approaching because of the power creep and the upgrades and the new items that we've had since the nerf. It's getting close, but they're still kind of weak.
Well, weak relative to what they were beforehand, not relative to what they are in game and what the capabilities are.
Weak to what they were before the nerf, but still significantly better than what their nerfed state was.
And for a shield bypass mechanic in game, and there are a couple of them that are in game right now. My opinion is this thing is by far the most devastating, powerful. I don't know if there's a proper adjective to describe the type of damage that these things actually do to targets in both PvE and PvP. Gentlemen, while you're formulating your opinions on this, I want to bring in SOB here, because Mr. Cheesemeister has figured out ways on how to roll this thing all over people and laugh all the way to the bank while people get frustrated.
It mainly comes down to just how much they're buffed by the tactical captain abilities. For one thing, they only crit when Fire at Will is active. They do not crit with any other weapon enhancement abilities, and they do not crit with weapons themselves. Only while that ability is active. So in PvE, for example, or PvP, you can just have your Fire at Will up, hit attack power and alpha, decloak, melt an entire group of people with crits from the plasma explosions that hit harder than Beam Overload 3s, and it's constant shield bypass. It's extremely deadly, and for that situation, game-breaking.
Although Fire at Will is one of the worst abilities for PvP. I mean, all you need is someone with an aceton assimilator and you're toast.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Not with this now, and especially with some of the immunity mechanics that are already in game. I don't see that happening, considering that there are actually vids where people dropping this stuff, and Fire Will is still blowing up people in 2 seconds or less. Typically, I'm on the receiving end of it, but I put a big asterisk on this one that I'm purposely built as a glass cannon. So me blowing up in 2 seconds flat is nothing new. That happens. But when you have people who are, while not quite as tough as Vel, are on the same level, or at least on the way to being on the same level, they get blown up in 1 to 2 salvos, that's a problem.
This was, okay, no, this is not something new. I'm sorry, this is not something new. There was a time when, certain members of the DPS channels, myself included, decided to go into the PvP arenas and cap and hold with our PvE builds, our FA scimitars or FA whatever it was, and completely wiped the floor with people. This was before Delta Rising. This was before all of this. And literally, we'd go in there and melt people in seconds, like you're describing. We didn't need the plasma burst to do it. So this is not something new. And we've talked about this before. There's always counters to stuff in PvP. So, if you have this issue, then, there's feedback pulse, and there's other immunities that you can run. There's different things. There's always a counter. There's always a yin to every yang in PvP.
So could somebody explain to me what the counter is to this?
I guess I've mentioned it before. I haven't PvP'd recently, but I would assume some kind of feedback pulse build, some kind of
reflect it.
It reflects what they're shooting back at you. I mean, if you have a feedback pulse build that's doing a reflection of 1.5 or 1.9 or however much you can do it with, stacking the party gens and the particle manipulator, the guy might be able to kill you in 2 or 3 shots, but their first shot is going to kill himself. There's other things. You have like the palisade and the reflection matrix that goes on, or even the Nukara shield. I got hit once in PvP with I think it was a 30k hit, and it reflected back something like 500k at the person that was shooting at me. So yeah, there are ways to counter it, And here's the thing. I've always said this before. You guys have heard me. The cry of the PvPer, whatever kills me is cheese, whatever I use is fair play. And all right, so there's a new meta here. People have got to learn to adapt and to change and to figure things out instead of crying for nerf, nerf, nerf.
Besides that, isn't the current PvP meta chain immunities, or was it Intel debuff spam where you make someone chain out of control? I'm sure there's lots of things you can do to completely disable the person. However, as to what to do about it in PvE, I think Marshall brings up a good point. The fact that its shield bypassing damage does make it very effective at killing NPCs with 5 billion shields and 5 million hull, which puts weapons that can't proc plasma explosions at a disadvantage. So there's a couple things you could do. You could give torpedoes more ways to bypass shields, maybe PvE specific. You could decrease the shield strength or regeneration of these NPCs, or make it easier to take their shields offline. You could make this apply to kinetic weapons. I mean, there's things that could be done, but I think Marshall's right that there is a problem with the massive amounts of HP making all shield bypassing damage significantly more effective than non-shield bypassing damage in elite SDFs.
There's one thing I want to point out here for elite SDFs. Shield bypass is mandatory. It really is, because there's really no way to really complete it otherwise. Example, Hive Space Elite. We only were able to complete it once we got the plasma consoles and the enhanced armor pen from before the nerf. After the nerf, we weren't able to complete it anymore up until very recently. So, it is something that is required for the elites, not so much for the advanced. But just to say something else here, I've been testing this in the past couple of weeks, trying different ships, and these are ships that I've tested before the plasma nerf, and I know exactly how much DPS they did with the plasma consoles pre-nerf, and testing them now with the current consoles the way they are, and I'm telling you, they are nowhere near close to what they were before. For example, my Science Odyssey, you guys know it. Before the nerf, it was hitting 75k plus. And today, the same exact build, but with added power creep sets as the Iconian set and some of the new traits out there, it's barely getting to 60k. I think I scored 63k, something like that. So there's still over a 15k gap from what they were before to what they are now. So in other words, I would say they need a buff. They need more of a buff. And I agree with you. It works better with FA than anything else. They should set it up so that it actually crits with scatter volley, rapid fires, surgical strikes, and reroute emergency power to whatever that is. We need more power. We need more power creep. We need these to work with the other types of weapons out there, so people have an easier time with the elite queues, some of these really difficult elite queues.
To add on to that, my Scimitar hit 79k at the height of the old plasma consoles, with a significant amount of upgrades, some new traits, and more. It's still not cracked 67, I think, is its best. And I know I put in quite a lot of work just to get it back up over the 60 hump. And also, since I know on the revamp, Mordecus was talking about crits making up for decreased damage, I know it gave me the very strong impression that it was intended to crit, all the time during everything, and that thanks to some random magic, it's only critting during fawn, and it should be critting with everything, which I would rather it did.
Well, here comes another point, though. I mean, we're talking about the primary focus was been up on the upper echelon of content, the elite queues, the high DPS runs, everything else. What about the average player? What about the people who are coming in, who are just starting to learn builds and just heard about these consoles and getting them, and then they start using this for whatever builds that they're using now? When these start becoming their main portion of damage to whatever target they're firing at, isn't there going to be some sort of adjustment to start making things a little bit more challenging because of these consoles?
I would say it's the opposite for two reasons. First of all, they're already working on making things easier. Secondly, embassy explosions are a zero skill thing. There's nothing you can do in your fawn outside of maybe trying for a slightly better GDF or timing buff slightly better to increase the damage. When you compare that to, like, in my runs, my beams are significantly higher in damage. They're normally putting out 30 to 40 in my runs compared to 10 to 15 of the embassies. In my damage, and I'm a high damage player, I'm using my skill and my build path to get more out of my weapons because I'm a skilled player. But these new players are going to be getting no more increased damage out of this, basically. And so this is a tool to help them step up to the very advanced difficulties that they're now facing versus what they would have been facing a year ago.
I wouldn't say that they're zero difficulty, because the amount of damage you do with the plasma burst will scale up with the amount of damage you actually do apart from those. So if you're a better pilot and you can get into position better and you can time your abilities better, you can hit your buffs at a certain time, your plasma damage will increase. They will get better that way. But if you don't, there's going to be a certain minimum amount of damage you're going to do with them, and yeah, that isn't going to be controllable. But as for whether this is going to affect the meta, so to speak, if there's going to be adjustments needed, I don't believe so, because the adjustments have already been done or are in the process of being done. What we really should see or would like to see is some of the queues that don't have elites to be released, and then we can actually do some judging in that regards, like ISE, CSE, KSE. So those ones don't have elite queues, and really we should have. People have been demanding them. Once we see those, then we can take a look. Maybe these plasma consoles would make them too easy. Maybe not. Who knows? We're going to have to see.
Well, I can tell you just from my own experience between High Space Elite and Gateway to Grethor Elite, those two experiences for me and my unique Snowflake build are night and day. I would feel much more competitive as well as contributing to the run in a High Space Elite. I know I've done one already with Vel back before I can even do some serious damage with my torpedo boat. But even then, I was able to put out some decent numbers for it. I was able to contribute to the team. In a GGE, I've already taken myself out, because after trying it once and then making 2 more attempts again, I felt like it was not only felt like it was nothing, I was doing nothing. I couldn't switch to anything that would actually do any sort of shield bypass damage or damage overall unless I went straight to beams with the plasma consoles. Period. End of story. Yeah, I could throw on Transphasics night and day and then start doing everything on there with it. All I was doing was debuffing, and even then it was only a small amount of debuffing. It would have been better to bring in a science ship with 5 consoles and put my energy weapons at 50% power and start falling away. I would have done twice as much more damage, if not more, doing it that way than running with something else. If it was a pure side torp boat, a pure torp boat, a cannon bolt, I feel for them. I really feel for the cannoneers out there. because those elites will chew you up, even if you do have the abilities to be able to bypass some of the lockouts. They will eat you alive. And if that becomes the new meta for elites, what's going to happen down the pipe for the advanced and for the normals? Now, granted, yes, currently they are making adjustments to make them easier, but what's coming down the pipeline leaves a big question mark, at least for me.
Well, even for the standard meta of Fall everything, going into Gateway to Grethel Elite and the Herald's Face Elite, it's not easy. It's like you said, even for those guys, it is just a buffet of frustration, because you do need support. You do need some alternatives than just activate Fall and just hit everything, because unless you're doing 75k plus, more like 80, 90k, it's not going to work. So what you really need to do is have some alternatives, like drain builds, like particle gen builds, stuff that can either shut down, debuff, or hit the target straight through the shields. And even then, you can't have a pure shutdown build. You have to be a hybrid. You have to be part tank. You need to have your tactical team. You need to have your engineering team. You need to have your science team. You need to have all three of them running. Otherwise, you're just going to have a rotten time of it, because you're not going to be able to do anything.
I'm going to be really funny here for a second. I just pulled up the Hive log that I ran with Marshall. This was way back in the height of the old Embassy consoles. 77% of my damage was to Hull. 81% of Marshall's damage was to Hull, and he was in a torpedo back then. This was before he had Chemosite, which was more shield bypassing damage and all that fun.
Actually, Chemosite does upfront damage to the shields and just debuffs the hull, so which would have made my life a lot easier. But even then, I was playing as a team with you guys, to where you started, you and everybody else started falling down or single target down a specific cube, and then as soon as the shields went down, I timed my shots and just high yield in all the way, and I used torp spread for the smaller targets. So we were playing there as a team and coordinating as a group, which was great because we were all together as a team. You and one other person served as the tanks, soaked up most of the damage. We had two other people who were specialist targets. We started focus firing on one, and we knocked it down. In something like GGE or HSE, we have to split. At that point, your builds have to be, like what SarcasmDetector stated, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You have to be a little bit more tanky. You have to have ways to either cleanse yourself of all the debuffs or debuff the target before they debuff you. But the most optimal build for those type of situations would be fall, embassy consoles, have side team rolling, have engineering team available to you, have a couple of other abilities available to you from both of those schools, and then just go to town on the targets. If you're a cannoneer, even with those type of builds, you're suffering. Not only just because you have to get much closer to the target, which will then allow them to eat you alive with their raw abilities on top of their debuffing abilities, but you're not going to do optimal damage being at the same range as a fall boat with those consoles, which are critting to hull, which kills the target before the shields go down. And it's a significant amount of damage. If you've seen the video from Snipey 47 Alpha, he breaks it down for you on a chart. And there are other people who have logs, including myself, who have been chronicling all of these changes between the embassy consoles and who uses them and what type of damage you're getting from them. So we have tons of logs to go through, and you can see the percentage breakdown, how much damage they're doing, how much damage they're working for is for cannon builds versus beam boat builds with fall versus beam boat builds with a beam overload. You see a huge gap there. And if we have to rely on that gap just to be able to complete an elite, I think there's something wrong here.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's something wrong here, but let's not talk about nerfing this, because nerfing the plasma is going to put a lot of the elite content out of reach for everyone.
No, mind you, I'm not calling for a nerf. I'm just saying big picture, looking forward, what's going to happen there if the entire game or future hard mode content is going to be designed around this.
What we need is for the crits to work with the other weapon buffs. That's what we need. And maybe a little bit more power.
And one other thing I'm going to point out is that as much as there's this point about plasma bypassing shields, quick look at something I posted the other day led me to remember that torpedoes actually can do more shield bypassing damage than any other weapon type, because beam arrays are just limited to their procs and the natural bleed through of the enemy plus whatever bonus bleed through they have, whereas torpedoes can use all of that bonus bleed through and apply Mega Kinetic Shearing, which is bonus damage on the damage they already bled through with, and they have a weapon type that has innate increased bypass, and they have a couple of fun other procs that bypass shields again.
Could you do the math on all of that, please, to make sure you get that correct?
And what I was going to finish with is most torpedo builds are done on science ships, and most science abilities either do 100% or 50% shield bypassing damage. I'm not saying torpedoes do the most damage if you're looking at terms of overall DPS through hull. I'm saying torpedoes have more ways of bypassing shields than any other weapon type in the game.
If that is the case, which I'm not denying you of that, I'm calling for you to look at the numbers of what is actually making it to hull. Because if you're looking at 75% mitigation of damage right off the bat before resistances, and then whatever makes it to hull has to make it past resistances before actual final damage is calculated.
No, it doesn't. The way it works is it splits the damage. There's the damage that's going to bleed through, and the damage that's not going to bleed through. The damage that is going to bleed through completely ignores any resistances shields have, including the innate 75%. The damage that the shields take gets hit by the 75%, and then the shield's innate resistance to kinetic, but the damage to hull completely ignores the reduced damage to shields from every source.
So we're looking at most 10% and then at the least 5%, which doesn't happen all the time. I submit my logs to you for review.
What should be happening is all NPCs have an innate 10% bleed through. If you decide to use transphasics, because of the math behind it, 46% of your damage bypasses shields and then goes directly to the hull, which should mean that your shot, even if, let's say for whatever reason, the shields would completely absorb all of it and the damage is completely worthless, if you're firing against a standard target, you'll be doing more than 50% of your damage actually to the hull, which is significantly more than a beam would be doing, or a cannon, or whatever. So, I know torpedoes need buffs. They need something, but they do have things to consider.
Which is true, except you're missing one key point. The amount of damage that finally makes it to the hull is so insignificant that it doesn't matter unless you are juicing the torpedo's damage ability to astronomical numbers. And even then, there are times where I would be able to put out a raw damage torp of 300k or higher. It would hit the target and do next to no damage. We're talking in the thousands that finally make it to hull. The thousands.
Sounds like a bug. Start submitting me log files and I'll start looking at stuff.
I've given you the links to them months ago. You still have access to them.
Alright, I'll take a look.
Wait, a bug with torpedoes? Stop.
Never heard of such a thing in my life.
Stop the crazy talk.
All right. Well, moving on here. Funny that you mentioned sort of fixing bugs here. We still have the quest to fix lag. Now, coming out on Tribble, there are several other bug fixes that are down the pipe. I didn't have time to look at the specifics of it. Have any of you gentlemen logged on to Tribble since those patch notes and seeing any sort of improvement there? Yes,
Actually,
no,
no. I haven't. I think Bell did.
I haven't been on Dribble recently to test for lag. However, I do know one person, can't remember the name offhand, who is very significantly affected right now by FPS drops. Said that that is fixed for them on Redshirt, which is great because when you're trying to play the game with a constant 5 FPS on a computer that should be able to handle that, that's a serious problem. So if they got that fixed, massive props.
About that, I just want to remind stuff that's going on to Trouble right now is not going to be going on to Holodeck until 10.5 is released.
Right,
So
that
really,
was a Redshirt test.
yeah. So stuff we really want to be looking at is actually on Redshirt.
Oh, thank you for informing me about that. I did not know. Oh, and so we're going to look at whatever happens on Redshirt and then make our notes about that. And then we'll bring it up on the next show. How about that?
Sounds good. Now there was a maintenance done on Tuesday, and okay, so before Tuesday, before the maintenance, the lag had been getting good. It was actually really, really good, and people had started getting records back. I know I managed to get us a couple of nice records before Tuesday. Like I said, the lag was pretty much almost gone. And then they did the maintenance. And it's like taking a step 2 or 3 months back. It's just really disappointing.
I will say this here, and that while it may be disappointing in the short term, if they have a network roadmap for how they're restructuring their entire network, and this is just phase one of it, it's sad that they had to put it into production, but it may be necessary for whatever they have coming out in phase 2
Tomorrow,
or 3.
according to Trendy, stage 2 of it is going to go out. It's why the maintenance is 6 hours tomorrow.
I would also
Perfect.
like to point out that this was network lag that they were trying to fix, not server-side lag, and my friend Mikey, who has been completely unable to play Infected Space, said he's been fine on every other queue, but not Infected Space for the past several months now. Got his first run where his ping was under 1 second in an ISA just after that patch. And I think the server lag has been significantly better today, although it was pretty terrible on Tuesday. I'll definitely say that.
And I'm still seeing a lot of well, actually, rubber banding is not something I'm seeing a lot of. What I'm seeing is misfires and general FPS loss at the same time. So there's going to be a change tomorrow, and I'm just really, really hoping that they didn't break anything. Trying to fix something else.
I'm actually touting optimism in this case here. Having done this before in my professional realm, that if we put these network changes out in stages, we would see the final stage show a significant improvement over each incremental stage. So I'm actually hopeful for this within the next couple of weeks. Not expecting to see everything hunky-dory and full of roses and I can activate all my abilities and keep them all to keep up with you bastards out there. But within the next couple of weeks, I'm willing to say let's give them room to work, let the network engineers and the architects do their job, and then we will then evaluate it accordingly after it's done. From the outside looking in and not having a roadmap of what they're doing, I'm seeing probably a stage 3, 4, possibly a 5. And you're going to see Perfect World's own network structure advance one layer forward. And I'm hoping that they're going to have a means by which they can tap into multiple backbone providers, so that in case if one is saturated for peak hours in one geographic region, they could tap into 2 or 3 different sources to feed them data, incoming as well as outgoing, for their data centers.
You're breaking up there, Odin.
Sorry, so that would help ease the congestion for what they're doing. Mic check.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I just gotta hope that things get better because Tuesday I lost in evasive maneuvers twice and it went on a 15-second cooldown. I've heard of Fa dropping and all that stuff, but evasive maneuvers was a new one and that was really painful because that cost me a new record right there.
Oh, quit your whining, boy. I'm used to losing my high yields and torpedo spreads. Might as well just strip off all my weapons at this point.
I lost like a good 15 seconds of combat and still pulled 66k. I was pretty frustrated about that.
Show off, elitist prick. All right. Closing out this, Timber, you're going to get the last howl on this one, or word, or whichever one you want to use at this point in time. Continuing on with the series of what would you pay for in this game using Dill or Zen? What service or commodity or item would you like to get for Zen or Dill?
Well, I was bouncing this off in TeamSpeak earlier, and I had some pretty good feedback from it. And we were talking about this earlier about starships and their traits and how they're releasing starships with the traits. And the starships are can be so-so or they can be great, but it's really the traits we're after. And the big thing that people were willing to pay was have a separate section just for starship traits. So, okay, let's say the Avenger comes out. It's 3,000 Zen. Fantastic trait, but you already have an Avenger, and the Arbiter class, which is the new Avenger, doesn't do anything for you. It's not an upgrade in any sense. The fleet version isn't any upgrade. You're mainly buying it for the trait. Well, instead of you spending 3,000 Zen on a ship you're never going to use just for the trait, a lot of people were agreeing that 1,000 Zen for the trait itself would be a good idea, because a lot of times recently the selling point for the starship has been the trait itself, not so much the ship. I mean, a lot of people are out there, they're buying Astikas not for the ship, they're buying it for supremacy. Same with these new Arbiters and the Mu guys and all that. It's for the trait, not the ship. And while there are people that are ship collectors or they want to try experimental builds on new ships, a good chunk of people are buying these just for traits. And 3,000 Zen, which, if it's coming out of your paycheck, basically, that's $30. If you're converting it with in-game dilithium, I think the current exchange rate would be about close to 800,000 refined dilithium for 3,000 Zen. Either one is a lot of currency to pay for a trait. But if you're willing to spend 1,000 Zen on a trait, at least you know what you're getting. You're not getting something that's wasted or is going to be banked or thrown away. You're getting exactly what you're paying for. And even if it does get nerfed or it gets buffed or whatever the case may be, you didn't spend a whole lot on it comparative to what you'd spend on the ship that would just sit in the bank after you got the trait. And a lot of people I had a lot of positive feedback, but I didn't know what our viewers thought, and I didn't know what our panel would think about that. But I thought, and the average price was 1,000 Zen, and I just didn't know what our panel would think of that. And I think it would make decent money.
I'm going to go even further here. I would consider paying the full starship, or the full price of the starship, to have the trait as an account unlock, because right now I have to pay to get the trait on Fed, I have to pay to get the trait on ROM, because I actively like to use both of those characters, and if I wanted a KDF, I'd have to buy the trait 3 times. And there's some traits I can't even get on my Romulan or KDF, because, oh my gosh, I want reciprocity so badly on my Romulan, it's painful.
So say 1,000 for say a tune unlock on the trait, 3,000 for account unlock.
I would be pretty okay with that.
Yeah, and that way, if you're just doing one tune, okay, 1,000 Zen, that's not that for me for marketing, because that's something I studied in college. That's a good return on investment. You're spending it on the investment, and 1,000 Zen for a single character, that's doable. That's reasonable. If you're paying 3,000, you're getting it for every tune you ever make. That's also reasonable. It's just the 3,000 for the ship that you're going to throw away or not use for that trade, and that's kind of the way I look at it.
I
Okay,
can
I'm
dig
back,
it.
guys. Sorry, had a network issue here. What did I miss? You guys are talking about traits. It sounds like.
The
Well,
the
we're
idea the idea of sarcasm that I had bounced around was with the ships, instead of, since a lot of people buy the ships for the trait, just have a trait shop, just like they have the ships, and then having a separate Zen cost for that. That way, you don't have to waste 3,000 Zen on a ship for a trait, when you could have 3,000 Zen, as Vel said, for an account unlock, or 1,000 Zen for a character unlock for just the trait itself, and then you don't have a ship sitting in space dock that you never use.
Okay, I'm gonna say something a little bit unpopular. People are gonna hate me for saying this, but there are certain traits like reciprocity I do not want the other factions to have. I'm sorry, but Romulans and Klingons already have enough advantages over Feds, and I primarily play a Fed, that, let's not give them any more advantages. I mean, the Romulans have the SROs, and the Klingons have the pirate buffs, which we can get access to as Feds, but in very limited quantities. There's a lot of other advantages that they have that us poor Feds are kind of lacking. So you know what? If the Feds have an advantage, just with a trait like this, so be it. I love it. I need every single advantage I can get to keep up with this. And let's be realistic. I know people are going to say, but oh wait, the Romulans have their own disadvantages. They have less power. What less power? You have supremacy now as well. That completely negates that argument. If you have supremacy as a Romulan, that really removes the last disadvantage that Romulans have. It's completely unfair, but you know what? Let me keep my reciprocity and just have at least something, anything.
You know what you have? You have some of the best phaser-based consoles in the game. You have easy teaming. You have the best spacebar in the game. Nobody thinks you're a bad guy, and all of your DOFs are cheap. I'm playing around KDF. I'm screwed on literally all of that.
Hey,
And I
you know
have some
what?
nice advantages.
You know what?
But I'm
Fed
sorry.
side, we could use overwhelming force. Thank you very much. Just saying.
I'd trade you, just saying.
No, how about we equally share? I'll take that. I'll take that. Going off of what TimberWolf has brought up here, I would actually pay Dill to have a second skill sheet for my captain, because I want to swap between having a beam spec, having a science spec, having a kinetic spec. So that way, if I'm going to instance hop on different things and I must absolutely be forced to change my entire build just to fly with my friends, I need to be able to respec, or have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to switch from this torpedo spec to this energy weapon spec, and then go with them on the fly. So I would love to be able to buy a second and even a third skill sheet for my captain. That way I can build them all in advance, and then based off of the ship I want to select and the map I want to go in with my buddies, I can just swap the sheets.
I
I would
have to
also
agree with that.
be in favor of that, because there's some ships I would love to try out, and a lot of loads I'd like to try out, but I can't exactly pull off with 9 points in threat control, simply because some ships were not meant to have 9 points in threat control.
Oh, come on, man. You could fly a Defiant with 9 points of threat control and use torpedoes. Suck it up.
Okay.
I agree with it from the doing multiple builds at a time. Like for myself, I do a beam setup with FAW. I am one of those, fanboys, I guess. But I also want to try a kinetic build, and it's very nerve-wracking when you're going to test something that you're just learning to have to respec everything, and then when you're going back from testing to what you're used to, you have to respec everything, and having a second tree that's already set up for it.
Did we lose him?
Maybe I thought I was dropping out again.
Same. You know what? I think we lost him temporarily, or he muted himself. That could be it. Timber.
But
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
here.
I would agree with that, having multiple specs or a dual spec, whatever, say, kind of like the loadouts, like how the loadout is. Like basically you have two free loadouts for your ship and, torpedo layout, beam layout, or, PvE layout, or PvP layout.
Full side layout, sub hunter layout. And we could start hunting down SOB and his stealth cheese out there.
Exactly.
Yeah, like I have a tank I'd love to throw a grav well on, but I can't fit part gens and grav gens and justify them on the rest of my ships. So he runs a grav well one with no grav gens or part gens. And I'd love to try a kinetic tank, but I apparently have to get a third tank character to do that because I don't want to fly around with a tank not spec'd into his weapon type, or with the rest of my tanks having to dual spec into projectiles and energy, or swapping back up for ships is not something I can afford to do.
Wait. Did you say kinetic tank?
It's gonna do more than 2.3k DPS, it'll be fine.
The kinetic community is growing.
Oh, and to make matters better, it's a nebula, but we'll get to crazy builds sometime later.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to be playing around with that one on the build show.
Don't forget, Marshall, I'm part of that Torp community with my AP Torp, or also known as the best Torp.
I'm sorry,
are
you do not
best
count.
You're a bastard. You're an abomination to everything that is the kinetic community.
How could you say that? How could you say that? The AP Torp is like the best Torp in the game.
Y'all are trolls of epic proportions.
So good.
I love it. It's so awesome. It just works.
That plasma torp would be nice too if people use it, and it didn't fire so slow and didn't get shot down.
And didn't cost 200 Lopie.
Do you mean if it worked anything like the good torpedo? Instead, it's just targetable and just crap.
Oh yeah, and it doesn't get hit by feedback pulse too. Yet it's pure energy. Does pure energy to shield. So it is the best of both worlds. With none of the drawbacks.
Spencer, I think we should start calling it the torpedo with capitals. Because
that is great.
You all are dead to
there's
me.
any other good ones out there.
You all are dead to me. All of you. All right. So wrapping up the show here, we're definitely going to be doing a well-expanded show on the state of PvP. We're going to bring in a couple guest speakers on that. We're going to have some ground experts to come up and give us the good dive into ground gameplay. I don't like to get my boots dirty, but these guys are going to give me the whole lowdown on the ground level. No pun intended on that. TimberWolf has already been doing a series on ground play anyway, so I'm actually going to have to review those videos before I start going with those pros. And then I'm probably going to look at them and say, how the hell do you bastards do that? Because that's impressive. We're going to continue on with the series of our fleet interviews. We're going to have some updates to the show, both externally as well as internally, but we're still going to keep the same air. We're still going to keep the same mistakes, the jabber-jawing and whatnot here. We like conversing with people here, so we're going to see if we can expand our format to allow people from the audience to come and drop us questions on the fly. We'll answer them on the fly. Anything else that you want to do, post on here. We'll have a forum coming up soon where you can post there as well. We link to everything and look at everything from Reddit to the official forums to wherever in cyberspace that you want to tag us at. The show will be there with you. And we will also follow up with something that our Chief Intelligence Officer has been looking at. I don't know if you want to call it a special project or something, but we definitely need to have some info on you within the coming weeks. You've been tasked.
Oh, you can waterboard me all you want. I'll never reveal my secrets.
Oh, we have ways. We have ways. Yes. So thank you from the Chief Logistics Officer, Captain TimberWolf. Howl us out, please.
Oh!
Our Chief of Cheesy Tactics here. You know what? Give us a snicker or something there. We know you're evil anyway. Yeah. Quiet you. Our Chief Intelligence Officer, we know you're going to survive whatever torture you're going to take, but for sure, seriously, waterboarding, that's illegal, man. We're not doing that to you. And thank
We're
you
just
for
going to
our...
make them fly toward boats.
It's not illegal on my ship.
Oh, it isn't? Well, you're Rom. You're filthy Rom anyway, so get out of here. And thank you to our guests tonight, Mr. Mathematician, the Scimitank himself, Vel, Jarvis, and Alfred. Thank you, sir. And this is Odin Knight saying from the show, good night. See you out there.